Black girl was kicked out by her in-laws, not knowing she's actually an undercover billionaire. The champagne flutes clinked together in the Crawford mansion's grand dining room, but the sound felt hollow to Zara Mitchell Crawford as she watched her mother-in-law's cold blue eyes scan her from across the mahogany table. 3 years of marriage, and Vivian Crawford still looked at her like she was a stain on expensive silk. "So, Zara," Vivian's voice cut through the dinner conversation like ice. "Still working at that little nonprofit, I assume?" The way she said little made it sound like an insult wrapped in politeness. Zara set down her fork carefully, her dark fingers steady despite the familiar knot forming in her stomach. "Actually, I've been helping some families secure affordable housing. Last month we helped 12 families avoid foreclosure by negotiating payment plans with..." "How charitable." Camilla, Ethan's younger sister, interrupted with a saccharine smile that never reached her eyes. "Though I suppose someone has to help those people." The pause before those people hung in the air like poison. Zara felt her husband Ethan shift uncomfortably beside her, but he remained silent. Always silent. "Those people are families who deserve homes," Zara replied quietly, her voice steady despite the fire building in her chest. "Everyone deserves stability." Vivian laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Oh, darling, how naive. Some people are simply meant for different circumstances. It's not personal, it's just reality." Zara had heard this song before. 3 years of barely concealed racism disguised as concern for social order. 3 years of watching Ethan's jaw tighten when his family spoke, but never seeing him open his mouth to defend her. She'd married him believing love could bridge their different worlds, but she was learning that some bridges were built to collapse. The dinner continued with the usual Crawford theatrics. Talk of their real estate empire Crawford and Ellis Realty, complaints about property taxes on their multiple homes, and pointed comments about people who married above their station. Zara ate in silence, mentally cataloging every slight, every sneer, every moment Ethan chose his family's comfort over her dignity. 2 weeks later, everything changed. Ethan came home with shoulders slumped and eyes red-rimmed. "They let me go," he said, collapsing into their modest apartment's single armchair. "Budget cuts. 15 years with the firm, and they just let me go." Zara's heart ached seeing him broken. Despite everything, she loved this man who'd chosen her in a college library 4 years ago, who'd whispered promises about building a life together away from his family's judgment. She knelt beside his chair, taking his hands in hers. "We'll figure this out," she said softly. "I've been putting money aside. My nonprofit work doesn't pay much, but I've been freelancing too, helping small businesses with their books, doing some consulting. We have enough to cover expenses for a few months while you job hunt." What she didn't tell him was that her freelancing involved much more than bookkeeping. Years of quietly studying real estate law, finance, and urban development had given her skills she'd kept hidden, along with a small but growing portfolio of investments that her family had helped her start before they passed away. Skills and money she'd never mentioned because she'd learned that admitting to ambition or success only made the Crawford family's resentment worse. But Ethan's face didn't show gratitude. It showed something darker, shame mixed with resentment. "I don't need your charity, Zara." "It's not charity. It's what married couples do, we support each other." "Support?" His voice grew sharp. "You mean like how you've been supporting those families? Playing the savior with pocket change while my family built an empire?" The words stung because they were so wrong, yet so revealing. Even Ethan, who claimed to love her, couldn't see past his family's poisonous view of who she was supposed to be. The next evening, Vivian called with an invitation to family dinner, the first time Zara had been explicitly included in months. She should have known something was wrong. The Crawford mansion felt more oppressive than usual as Zara walked into the dining room wearing her best dress, a simple black sheath that Camilla had once called cute for someone on a budget. Tonight, even that earned sneers. Well, Vivian began before they'd even sat down. "I hear our little family has hit some financial turbulence." Ethan's jaw clenched. "Mother, please." "Please what?" Pretend we don't know you've been unemployed for 3 weeks? Pretend we don't know your wife thinks she can solve your problems with her, what was it, consulting money? The venom in Vivian's voice made Zara's skin crawl, but it was the look of cruel satisfaction in her eyes that made her stomach drop. This wasn't just dinner, it was an ambush. Actually, Zara said carefully, I offered to help temporarily while Ethan looks for help? Camilla laughed sharply. Is that what we're calling it? I think the proper term is gold digging. The room went silent except for the tick of the grandfather clock in the corner. Excuse me? Zara's voice was barely above a whisper. Vivian leaned forward like a predator sensing weakness. Oh, don't act surprised, dear. We all see what's happening here. Ethan loses his job, and suddenly you're so eager to play the supportive wife with your little savings account. But we know what you're really after. Access to our family's resources. Our connections. Our legacy. That's not... Isn't it? Vivian's voice rose to a crescendo. A girl from your background doesn't marry into a family like ours unless she wants something. And now that my son is vulnerable, you're probably thinking this is your chance to sink your claws deeper into our family wealth. Zara felt like she'd been slapped. I have never asked for anything from your family. Not once. No, but you've certainly taken plenty, Camilla chimed in. The wedding we paid for. The connections that got you your little nonprofit job. The respectability that comes with our name. And now you want to play the generous wife? Please. Zara turned to Ethan, waiting for him to speak, to defend her, to remember the vows they'd made about facing the world together. But he sat frozen, staring at his plate like it held answers to questions he was too afraid to ask. Ethan. Vivian's voice softened into something even more dangerous. Maternal manipulation. You're my son and I love you. But this woman is going to drag you down. Look at what's happened already. You're out of work, dependent on her charity. Is this the life you want? Is this the legacy you want to build? Mom, that's enough. Ethan finally spoke, but his voice was weak, uncertain. Is it? Because from where I sit, it looks like you're choosing her over your family. Over your future. Over everything we've worked to build for generations. The silence stretched like a chasm. Zara could hear her own heartbeat in her ears as she waited for Ethan to choose. To stand up. To be the man she'd married instead of the boy his mother was still raising. But he didn't. He sat there, torn between two worlds, and chose the easier path, silence. Vivian smiled triumphantly. I think we all know where we stand now. Zara, dear, I think it's time you found your own way. Away from our family. Away from our son. Away from a life you were never meant to live. Zara stood slowly, her legs shaking but her spine straight. She looked at each of them, Vivian with her satisfied smirk, Camilla with her barely concealed glee, and Ethan with his cowardly silence. You're right about one thing, she said, her voice clear and steady. I was never meant to live this life. She pulled off her wedding ring and set it on the table with a soft clink. But not for the reasons you think. Without another word, she walked out of the Crawford mansion for the last time, leaving behind 3 years of trying to fit into a world that would never accept her, and a husband who would never fight for her. What they didn't know, what none of them suspected, was that Zara Mitchell had never needed their acceptance, their money, or their name. She'd been building something much bigger in the shadows, something that would soon make their family empire look like a house of cards in a hurricane. But that revelation would come later. Tonight, she simply walked away, carrying nothing but the clothes on her back and secrets that would change everything. The game was about to begin, and the Crawford family had no idea they just made the biggest mistake of their lives. 3 months after walking out of the Crawford mansion, Zara Mitchell legally ceased to exist. The woman who sat in the downtown law office signing papers was now Zara Blackwood, a name she'd chosen carefully, one that carried no history, no connections to a family that had disowned her or in-laws who had destroyed her. The lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Janet Torres, slid the final documents across the polished desk. It's done, Janet said quietly. New name, sealed records, fresh start. Are you sure about this? Zara looked at her new driver's license, credit cards, and social security documentation. The face in the photo was the same, but everything else had changed. Even her address, a modest apartment in a different part of the city where no one would think to look for the former Mrs. Crawford. "I've never been more sure of anything," Zara replied, her voice steady with newfound purpose. What Janet didn't know, what no one knew, was that Zara had been preparing for this moment long before that humiliating dinner. The freelance consulting she'd mentioned to Ethan was only the tip of an iceberg she'd been building since her parents' death 5 years earlier. Her parents, Dr. James Mitchell and Professor Sarah Mitchell, had been more than the humble background the Crawfords assumed. Her father had been a brilliant economist who'd quietly invested in undervalued properties throughout his career. Her mother, a urban planning professor, had taught Zara to see cities as living organisms, where growth would happen, where value would emerge, where power would shift. When they died in a car accident 2 years into her marriage, they'd left her more than grief. They'd left her $800,000 in carefully chosen investments, and a mind sharp enough to multiply it. Money she'd never told Ethan about because she'd learned early that admitting to financial independence made the Crawford family's hostility even worse. While playing the role of dutiful wife and nonprofit worker, Zara had been living a double life. Early mornings before Ethan woke, she studied market reports and property records. Lunch breaks were spent driving through neighborhoods, taking notes on development patterns and municipal planning documents. Evenings, when Ethan worked late, she attended real estate investment seminars under assumed names. Now, 6 months after her vanishing act, Zara sat in a different kind of office, the headquarters of her own company, Knox Ford Development Group. The name was deliberately unremarkable, the office location strategically modest. A small suite in a mid-tier building that wouldn't attract attention but provided everything she needed: privacy, legitimacy, and proximity to the city planning department. Her assistant, Marcus Rivera, knocked on her office door. He was a young man she'd hired away from a failing property management company, brilliant with numbers, hungry for opportunity, and completely unaware of his boss's previous life. "The Riverside District properties just hit the market," Marcus said, spreading files across her desk. "Exactly like you predicted 6 months ago." Zara smiled, studying the listings. The Riverside District had been dismissed by major developers as too risky, an area with aging infrastructure and a largely immigrant population that bigger firms ignored. But Zara had seen what others missed: the new metro line that would break ground next year, the city council's quiet plans for revitalization grants, and the university's decision to expand their campus eastward. "Make offers on all of them," she said calmly. 20% below asking price." Marcus looked nervous. "All of them? That's almost $2 million. I know exactly what it is." What Marcus didn't know was that this was just one move in a larger game. Over the past months, Zara had been mapping the city's future like a chess grandmaster, thinking 20 moves ahead. Every property she bought, every investment she made, was chosen not just for its individual potential but for how it fit into a larger strategy. A strategy that would eventually intersect with everything the Crawford family owned. Late that night, alone in her apartment, Zara spread out a detailed map of the city across her kitchen table. Red pins marked Crawford properties: their main office building, Vivian's country estate, Camilla's boutique location, the apartment buildings they managed. Blue pins marked her own growing portfolio. She'd been patient, careful, systematic. While they assumed she'd crawled away to lick her wounds, she'd been studying them. Learning their business patterns, their financial habits, their weaknesses. Crawford and Ellis Realty was successful but old-fashioned, relying on family connections and established relationships rather than innovation or market analysis. They had no idea that economic winds were shifting. The city was changing, demographics were evolving, and new development patterns were emerging that would make their traditional approach obsolete. They were dinosaurs who didn't realize the meteor was already on its way. Zara's phone buzzed with a text from Janet Torres. "Saw the news about Crawford and Ellis losing the waterfront project to some company called Knox Ford. Thought you'd find it interesting." Zara smiled in the darkness. The waterfront project had been the first major contract where Knox Ford had outbid Crawford and Ellis, though they still had no idea who their competition really was. It wouldn't be the last. She pulled up her laptop and began typing an email to a contact at the city planning department, someone who'd been very interested in her proposals for affordable housing development in underserved neighborhoods. Projects that would not only generate profit but actually help families like the ones she'd worked with at the nonprofit. Unlike the Crawfords, who saw real estate as a way to maintain their social position, Zara understood that true power came from building something meaningful. Something that lasted. Something that changed the world for the better while also achieving her goals. As she worked through the night, Zara thought about that last dinner at the Crawford mansion. About Vivian's cruel words, Camilla's smug superiority, and Ethan's devastating silence. They'd seen her as small, powerless, dependent. They had no idea that they'd just freed the most dangerous opponent they'd ever face. The hunt had begun. 18 months after Zara's disappearance, Vivian Crawford stood in her marble-floored kitchen, staring at a stack of bills that seemed to multiply like weeds. The morning sunlight streaming through her French doors felt harsh rather than welcoming, illuminating numbers that made her stomach clench with unfamiliar anxiety. "Mother, we need to talk." Camilla burst through the kitchen doors, her usually perfect blonde hair disheveled, her designer clothes wrinkled from a sleepless night. "They're foreclosing on the boutique building." Vivian's coffee cup rattled against its saucer. "What do you mean foreclosing? We own that building outright." "We did. But remember when we took that loan against it last year for the renovations? When Crawford and Ellis was having those cash flow problems?" Camilla's voice cracked. "I can't make the payments anymore. Business has been terrible, and now they're saying I have 30 days. This was impossible. The Crawford family didn't lose property, they acquired it. They were the ones who foreclosed on others, not the other way around. Yet here was her daughter, pale and shaking, holding foreclosure papers like they were a death sentence. The problems had started small, almost unnoticeable. A lost contract here, a delayed payment there. Crawford and Ellis Realty had been the dominant force in the city's commercial real estate market for 3 generations, but suddenly they were being outbid on every major project by companies no one had heard of, particularly one called Knox Ford Development Group. "Who is this Knox Ford company?" Vivian had demanded during a family meeting 6 months ago. "Where did they come from?" Ethan, who'd been struggling to find work since his termination, had done some research. "They're new, but they seem to have serious backing. Anonymous ownership, but their bids are always just high enough to beat ours. It's like they know exactly what we're proposing." Now, as Vivian watched her daughter fall apart, she realized those small losses had been adding up to something catastrophic. Crawford and Ellis had lost the waterfront development project to Knox Ford, a $50 million contract that would have secured their finances for years. Then the downtown office complex renovation went to another Knox Ford subsidiary. The city's affordable housing initiative, which should have been theirs by default given their family connections, had been awarded to yet another company that seemed to trace back to the same mysterious group. "There's more," Camilla whispered, sinking into one of the kitchen chairs. "I heard from Jessica at the country club that several families are having the same problems. The Hartmans lost their property management contracts. The Blackwells had to sell their vacation home. It's like someone is systematically targeting established families." A chill ran down Vivian's spine that had nothing to do with the morning air conditioning. "That's ridiculous. Who would have the resources or motivation to?" The kitchen door swung open again, and Ethan stumbled in, looking like he hadn't slept in days. His clothes were wrinkled, his eyes bloodshot, and he carried the defeated posture of a man who'd lost more than just his job. "They shut down Morrison and Associates," he announced flatly. "The company that finally hired me last month? Gone. Apparently, their parent company was acquired by some development firm, and they're restructuring operations." Vivian felt the world tilt slightly. "What development firm? Does it matter? It's the same story everywhere I interview. Companies are being bought out, restructured, or driven out of business by competitors with deeper pockets and better connections. Ethan collapsed into a chair beside his sister. I'm starting to think someone has it out for our entire social circle. The paranoid thought had been growing in Vivian's mind for weeks, but hearing it voiced made it feel terrifyingly real. She'd built her identity around being part of an untouchable elite, families whose wealth and connections went back generations. The idea that someone could systematically dismantle their world seemed impossible. Yet the evidence was mounting. Her country estate, the one she'd inherited from her mother, the one she'd bragged about during that final dinner with Zara, was now worth less than she owed on it thanks to some mysterious environmental issues that had suddenly appeared in the county records. Issues that made it nearly impossible to sell and expensive to maintain. The family's main office building, Crawford Plaza, was hemorrhaging tenants to newer, more modern buildings that seemed to offer better deals and superior amenities. Buildings owned by companies she'd never heard of but that all seemed connected to the same network of investors. Maybe we should sell, Camilla suggested quietly. Cut our losses and start over somewhere else. Sell to whom? Ethan laughed bitterly. Every potential buyer we've approached gets outbid by anonymous investors. It's like someone doesn't want us to liquidate our assets, they want us to slowly bleed out. Vivian stood abruptly, pacing to the window that overlooked her carefully manicured gardens. Gardens that she might not be able to afford to maintain much longer. This is coordinated, she said finally. Someone is doing this to us deliberately. But who would have the resources? Camilla asked. And why target us specifically? Vivian's mind raced through possibilities. Business rivals? Disgruntled former employees? Someone they'd foreclosed on years ago seeking revenge? But none of those scenarios explained the scope and sophistication of what seemed to be happening. I don't know, she admitted, her voice smaller than she'd ever allowed it to be. But I intend to find out. What she didn't know, what none of them suspected, was that the architect of their destruction sat in a modest office less than 5 miles away, methodically reviewing financial reports that detailed every move they'd made, every desperate decision, every sign of their growing panic. Zara Blackwood closed the file labeled Crawford Family Assets and allowed herself a small smile. Phase 1 was nearly complete. They were wounded, confused, and beginning to understand that they were under attack, but they still had no idea who their enemy was. Soon, it would be time for Phase 2, the revelation that would destroy not just their fortune, but their understanding of everything they thought they knew about power, family, and the woman they'd so foolishly underestimated. The web was tightening, and the Crawfords were finally beginning to feel the threads. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by courier to the Crawford family's nearly empty office building. Vivian Crawford held it with trembling fingers, noting the expensive paper stock and the simple logo, Knox Ford Development Group. They want to meet, she announced to Ethan and Camilla, who sat across from her in what used to be their grandfather's conference room. Half the furniture had already been sold to cover debts. Tomorrow at 2 p.m. Downtown Meridian Building, 42nd floor. Ethan looked up from his laptop, where he'd been unsuccessfully job hunting for the past 3 hours. Meet about what? It doesn't say. Just that they have a proposal regarding our mutual interests, and that attendance by all primary family members is requested. Vivian's voice carried a mixture of hope and dread. They specifically mentioned the potential for resolution of current difficulties. Camilla snatched the letter from her mother's hands. This is it. This is our chance to find out who's been destroying us. Maybe they want to negotiate. Maybe this whole thing has been some elaborate business strategy to drive down our prices before they make an offer. Or maybe it's a trap, Ethan muttered, but even he couldn't hide the desperation in his voice. 3 more companies had rejected his applications this week, citing restructuring and changing market conditions. The next afternoon, the 3 Crawfords rode the elevator to the 42nd floor in tense silence. The Meridian Building was one of the city's newer luxury office towers, the kind of place they used to belong without question, but now felt like foreign territory. The Knox Ford Development offices were understated but clearly expensive. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic views of the city, including several buildings the Crawfords recognized as properties they'd lost in recent months. A receptionist with kind eyes and a professional smile directed them to a conference room at the end of a marble-floored hallway. "Ms. Blackwood will be with you momentarily," the receptionist said, closing the door behind them. Vivian, Ethan, and Camilla took seats around a polished conference table that probably cost more than most people's cars. The walls were decorated with architectural photos of various development projects, some they recognized as developments that had outcompete their bids. "Blackwood," Camilla murmured. "I've never heard that name in real estate circles." "New money," Vivian said dismissively, though her voice lacked its usual conviction. "Probably tech or cryptocurrency. These people think they can buy their way into established industries." The door opened, and a woman entered carrying a leather portfolio. She was professionally dressed in a tailored navy suit, her dark hair pulled back in an elegant chignon. She moved with quiet confidence, taking her seat at the head of the table with the ease of someone accustomed to commanding rooms. For a moment, none of the Crawfords spoke. There was something familiar about her posture, the way she held her head, but the context was all wrong. This was clearly a successful businesswoman, someone with power and influence, someone who... Ethan's face went white. "Hello, Vivian." "Camilla." Zara's voice was calm, professional, with none of the deference or uncertainty they remembered. "Ethan." The silence stretched like a breaking wire. Camilla's mouth opened and closed without sound. Vivian gripped her purse so tightly her knuckles went white. Ethan looked like he might be sick. "Impossible," Vivian whispered finally. You disappeared. You're nobody. You're nothing." Zara smiled, not the nervous, placating smile they remembered, but something sharper, more confident. "I am Zara Blackwood, CEO and founder of Knox Ford Development Group. And I believe we have some business to discuss." "This is insane," Camilla sputtered, finding her voice. "You're that little non-profit worker who married my brother for money. You can't be. This is some kind of joke. Is it?" Zara opened her portfolio and slid a document across the table. "This is the deed to your boutique building, Camilla. As you can see, the foreclosure sale was completed yesterday. The new owner is Blackwood Properties, one of my subsidiaries." Camilla snatched up the paper, her eyes scanning the legal text. No, this isn't real. You can't afford. And this," Zara continued, sliding another document toward Vivian, "is the purchase agreement for your country estate. The environmental issues that made it unsellable? My environmental consulting firm will have those resolved within the month. Amazing what proper municipal connections can accomplish." Vivian stared at the papers like they were written in a foreign language. "How is this possible? Where did you get this money?" "The same place anyone gets money, Vivian. I earned it." Zara's voice remained perfectly level. "While you were busy explaining to everyone how small and helpless I was building something you never bothered to see." Ethan finally spoke, his voice hoarse. "Zara, I don't understand. When we were married, you were working at that nonprofit. You offered to help with my unemployment. You never had." "I never had permission to be successful," Zara interrupted. "Your family made it very clear that any ambition or competence on my part was a threat to your natural order. So I learned to hide it. I learned to be smaller than I was, quieter than I was, less than I was. Until the night you all decided I wasn't even worthy of that diminished existence." The room felt airless. Vivian struggled to process what she was hearing. "You've been planning this. All of it. The lost contracts, the foreclosures, the companies shutting down. Every single one." Zara's smile never wavered. "Did you really think you could humiliate someone, destroy their marriage, and dismiss them as worthless without consequences? Did you think your actions existed in a vacuum? But you were." Camilla's voice trailed off as she finally understood the magnitude of what they were facing. "I was what, Camilla? Poor? Black? Beneath you?" Zara leaned forward slightly. I was a woman with a graduate degree in urban economics, whose parents left her nearly $1 million in carefully chosen investments, who spent 3 years studying your business practices while you treated her like furniture. I was someone you should have tried to understand rather than destroy. Ethan put his head in his hands. Oh God. Zara, what have you done? What you forced me to do, she replied simply. I built my own table. The implications crashed over them like a wave. Every loss, every setback, every moment of confusion and growing panic, it had all been orchestrated by someone they'd dismissed as powerless. Vivian finally found her voice, but it came out as a croak. What do you want? Zara closed her portfolio with a soft snap. I want you to understand something that you never grasped when we were family. Power isn't inherited, Vivian. It's earned. It's built. It's taken by people who are underestimated by those too arrogant to recognize a threat until it's already won. She stood gracefully, smoothing her jacket. Tomorrow, you'll receive formal documentation regarding the terms of your new situation. I suggest you read it carefully. What new situation? Ethan asked desperately. Zara paused at the door, looking back at the 3 people who had once made her feel so small. The one where I own everything you used to have, and you exist entirely at my discretion. The door closed behind her with a soft click, leaving the Crawford family alone with the wreckage of everything they thought they knew about power, family, and the woman they should never have underestimated. The manila envelope arrived at what used to be called Crawford Plaza at exactly 9 a.m. the next morning, hand-delivered by the same courier service that had brought the meeting invitation. Inside were 3 sets of documents, each marked with a family member's name in elegant script. Vivian Crawford sat in her husband's old office, now stripped of everything valuable except the desk and chair, and read the papers with growing horror. The legal language was precise, professional, and utterly devastating. Property management agreement, she read aloud as Ethan and Camilla huddled beside her. This document outlines the terms under which the Crawford family may continue to occupy properties owned by Blackwood Holdings LLC. Occupy? Camilla's voice cracked. She's making us tenants in our own homes? Ethan scanned his copy with shaking hands. Look at the terms. We can stay in the family estate, but we pay rent. Market rate. To her. The woman we. He couldn't finish the sentence. The numbers were staggering. Monthly payments that would consume every penny they had left, with strict clauses about maintenance, behavior, and what Zara's lawyers politely termed appropriate conduct befitting the dignity of the property. She owns everything, Vivian whispered, flipping through page after page of property deeds, mortgage transfers, and corporate acquisitions. The office building. The country house. Camilla's boutique location. Even the parking garage downtown. How is this possible? The answer lay in the final document, a detailed timeline of every transaction, every strategic purchase, every moment over the past 2 years when Zara had quietly acquired pieces of their empire. Properties they'd been forced to sell, mortgages they'd defaulted on, business partnerships they'd lost to better-funded competitors. All of it had flowed to shell companies, investment groups, and development firms that ultimately traced back to one source: the woman they'd dismissed as a charity worker with delusions of adequacy. A soft knock interrupted their horrified review. Marcus Rivera, Zara's assistant, entered with the quiet confidence of someone who worked for the person who now controlled their fate. Ms. Blackwood asked me to see if you have any questions about the documentation, he said politely. She's prepared to meet with you again this afternoon to discuss implementation. Implementation? Vivian stood on unsteady legs. Young man, there's been some mistake. We're not signing anything. We'll fight this in court. We have lawyers' connections. Actually, Marcus consulted his tablet. Your legal representation was Hartman, Brooks and Associates, correct? They were acquired by a larger firm last week. The new management decided not to renew contracts with clients who have challenging financial situations. The blood drained from Vivian's face. However, Marcus continued smoothly. Ms. Blackwood anticipated you might want legal counsel. She's arranged for you to meet with Patterson and Davis. They specialize in tenant rights and property disputes. Very reasonable rates." The insult was wrapped in helpfulness, but it cut deeper than any direct attack. They were being offered lawyers who handled landlord-tenant disputes because that's what they were now, tenants. 2 hours later, they sat across from Zara once again, but this time in her office rather than a neutral conference room. The psychological difference was profound. Here, surrounded by photos of her developments and awards from city planning committees, Zara was clearly in her element. "I've reviewed your questions," she said, consulting notes that Marcus had apparently compiled from their morning panic. "Let me address them systematically." "Zara." Ethan leaned forward desperately. "Please. I know I hurt you. I know I failed you when you needed me most. But we were family once. Doesn't that mean anything?" For the first time since the revelation, something flickered in Zara's expression. Not softness exactly, but acknowledgement of shared history. "Family," she repeated slowly. "Yes, we were family. Until your mother made it clear that some family members were more valuable than others. Until you chose silence over solidarity. Until all of you decided that humiliating me publicly was an acceptable price for your comfort. I was weak," Ethan said, his voice breaking. "I was scared and weak and I chose wrong. But please, don't destroy everything because of my cowardice." "Destroy?" Zara tilted her head. "Ethan, I'm not destroying anything. I'm redistributing it. Your grandmother's estate will become a community center for at-risk youth. Your office building will house small businesses owned by people who actually need the opportunity. Camilla's boutique space will become affordable retail for local artisans. Those aren't your decisions to make." Camilla exploded. "That's our legacy. Our family's work." "Your family's work," Zara replied calmly, "was built on exclusion, exploitation, and the belief that some people matter more than others. I'm simply changing the equation." She slid 3 pens across the desk. "You have a choice. Sign these agreements and continue living in properties I own, under terms I set, contributing to communities you've ignored your entire lives. Or refuse and find somewhere else to start over with whatever resources you have left." "Which is nothing," Vivian said bitterly. "Which is more than you gave me," Zara countered. "I left your house with literally nothing but the clothes I wore. No money, no connections, no support system. Yet here I am." The silence stretched between them like a chasm. Vivian stared at the pen as if it were a snake. Camilla wept quietly into her hands. Ethan looked at the woman he'd once promised to love and honor, seeing clearly for the first time the person he'd allowed his family to destroy. "If I sign this," he said quietly, "if we all sign this, what happens to us?" "You learn," Zara said simply. "You learn what it's like to depend on someone else's goodwill. You learn what it's like to be grateful for opportunities instead of expecting them. You learn what I should have taught you 3 years ago, that respect isn't given based on bloodline or bank account. It's earned." One by one they signed. Vivian's hand shook so badly she could barely write her name. Camilla sobbed through her signature. Ethan signed last, looking up at Zara with something that might have been understanding, or might have been defeat. "Thank you," Zara said, collecting the documents. "Welcome to your new life." As they filed out of her office, Ethan paused at the door. "Was any of it real?" he asked. "When we were married, did you ever actually love me?" Zara met his eyes for a long moment. "I loved the man I thought you could be. I'm sorry you chose not to become him." The door closed, and Zara was alone with her victory. Complete, total, and somehow less satisfying than she'd expected. But it was done. The Crawfords would live under her terms now, and maybe, just maybe, they would finally learn what she'd been trying to teach them all along. Outside her window, the city stretched toward the horizon, full of possibility and change. Tomorrow, she would begin the real work, building something better from the ashes of their arrogance. 1 year later, Zara Blackwood stood on the front steps of what had once been the Crawford family estate, watching as dozens of children ran laughing through gardens that had been redesigned as playground spaces and outdoor classrooms. The mansion itself had been transformed into the Blackwood Youth Development Center, its marble floors now echoing with the sounds of after-school programs, job training workshops, and community meetings. "Ms. Blackwood!" A young girl with bright eyes and paint-stained fingers ran up to her, clutching a colorful drawing. "Look what I made in art class!" Zara knelt down to examine the picture, a family standing in front of a house, with a big sun shining overhead and flowers everywhere. "It's beautiful, Maya. Tell me about your family." "That's my mom, and my little brother, and that's our new apartment." Maya pointed excitedly. "Mom says we can stay there forever now because of the special program. She doesn't have to work 3 jobs anymore." The special program Maya mentioned was one of Zara's proudest achievements, a partnership between her development company and local employers to provide guaranteed affordable housing for working families. The same vision that had been dismissed as charity work when she suggested it to the Crawfords was now transforming entire neighborhoods. "Maya, can you do me a favor?" Zara asked, pulling out her phone. "Can you show Mrs. Rodriguez your picture? I think she'd love to see it." As Maya skipped away, Zara's assistant Marcus approached with his ever-present tablet and a knowing smile. The city council meeting went well. They approved the Riverside District expansion unanimously. 3 more blocks of mixed-income housing, with the community garden space you requested. And the business incubator? Fully funded. We'll have space for 30 small businesses, with priority going to minority-owned startups and immigrant entrepreneurs. Marcus scrolled through his notes. The irony isn't lost on anyone that we're using the old Crawford and Ellis building as headquarters for helping people they would never have supported. Zara nodded, watching a group of teenagers practice a dance routine on what used to be Vivian's tennis court. The transformation still amazed her sometimes. What had started as revenge had evolved into something much more meaningful, a chance to rebuild the city's power structure from the ground up, with community needs at the center instead of old money and social connections. Her phone buzzed with a text from Janet Torres, her lawyer. "Channel 7 wants to do that profile piece on you. Are you ready to tell your story publicly?" Zara had been avoiding media attention for 3 years, preferring to let her work speak for itself. But recently, other business leaders had been asking questions about the mysterious CEO who seemed to appear from nowhere and reshape entire industries. It was time to control her own narrative. 2 weeks later, Zara sat in her office across from investigative journalist Sarah Chin, who had built a reputation for exposing corruption and highlighting social justice stories. Chen's research had been thorough. She'd uncovered the connection between Zara Blackwood and the former Zara Mitchell Crawford, though she'd agreed to tell the story on Zara's terms. "So you were never actually poor," Chen said, reviewing her notes. "Your parents left you substantial resources, you had graduate-level education, and you were already building a business portfolio during your marriage. Yet your in-laws treated you as if you were a charity case. They saw what they expected to see," Zara replied. "A black woman from a middle-class background who married their son. They couldn't conceive that I might have my own resources, my own intelligence, my own ambitions. Their prejudice made them blind to who I actually was. And you used that blindness against them. I used their assumptions to protect myself while I built something better. When they forced me to choose between shrinking to fit their limitations or leaving to pursue my potential, the choice was obvious." Chen leaned forward. "Some people might say what you did was vindictive. That you could have simply walked away and built your empire without destroying theirs." Zara considered this carefully. It was a question she'd asked herself many times during sleepless nights over the past 3 years. "I could have built wealth and walked away," she agreed. "But that wouldn't have changed anything for the next person they decided was beneath them. It wouldn't have stopped them from using their inherited power to exclude and diminish others. Sometimes accountability requires consequences. And now? Do you consider your mission complete?" Zara smiled, glancing out at the city skyline where construction cranes marked the locations of her various development projects. The Crawford family was never the real target. They were just symbols of a system that needed changing. The real work is what comes next, building communities where everyone has opportunity, where power is distributed more fairly, where someone's background doesn't determine their ceiling. Any regrets? Only one, Zara said quietly. I regret that it took them rejecting me for me to fully embrace who I was meant to be. I spent 3 years making myself smaller to fit into their world, when I should have been building my own from the beginning. The interview aired on a Sunday evening, reaching millions of viewers across the country. By Monday morning, Zara's office was flooded with calls from other women who'd been underestimated, dismissed, or forced to hide their capabilities to avoid threatening fragile egos. That afternoon, as Zara walked through the Riverside district where families were moving into new affordable housing units, she received a text that made her pause. It was from Ethan. Saw the interview. I'm proud of who you became. I'm sorry for who I wasn't. Thank you for setting me free too. Zara looked up at the sky, feeling a weight she hadn't realized she was carrying finally lift from her shoulders. The cycle was complete. She'd reclaimed her power, redistributed their legacy, and built something meaningful from the ruins of their rejection. But more importantly, she'd proven something to herself and anyone else who'd ever been told they were too much, too ambitious, too threatening to the established order. The table they won't give you a seat at isn't worth sitting at anyway. Better to build your own table, and make sure there's room for everyone. The sun was setting over her city, a city she was helping to reshape one community, one family, one opportunity at a time. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new projects, new chances to prove that power built on inclusion was stronger than power built on exclusion. Zara Blackwood smiled and walked toward home, finally, truly free.